Good morning. Thank you all for coming and for providing my friends and me the opportunity to learn all the wonderful, important, life and world-changing lessons that you're hearing on today. I'm John Daugherty from Seattle, and I believe in liberation through evolution. Every day, people stand up to oppression. I'm talking about citizens standing up to an oppressive government. I'm talking about nations standing up to oppressive neo-imperialism. But most of all, I'm talking about individuals and groups standing up to oppressive ideas. Ideas like one ethnicity is genetically superior to another. Like men are deserving of more respect than women. Like people are poor because they are somehow deficient in character. These ideas, while deplorable, often do not reflect on the overall character of the person who believes them. The baseline of an idea is usually planted in our minds by parents, school, or the media, and then cultivated over time until it is mature enough to branch out by itself and explore. The baseline for my ideology was similarly planted by my wonderful family over there, cultivated by them and by my schools, and given the space to branch out and explore by those schools, my family, and by this program, Thinking Beyond Borders. I am not going to put a value judgment on this process, good or bad. It is simply the way that humans, indeed most mammals, work. I will, however, put a value judgment on the last step of this process, that a mind be given space to grow, to question and explore itself and the world around it. Too often this part is neglected, which must be changed because it is an absolutely necessary component of freedom and an equally important component of progress. These two values, freedom and progress, are central to my worldview, although I call them by different names, free will and evolution. Here's why I believe in them so strongly. As much as we humans are different, we are the same. Therefore, it stands to reason that we all have equal rights. I believe that there is a universal truth that transcends cultures, and it is morally obligatory for each culture to uphold it. That each individual has the right to choose his or her own fate, and that each individual in society must respect and protect that right. This means that murder is wrong, not because killing is fundamentally bad, but because it is against the wishes of that person to die. However, even though each society must uphold this value, it is up to that society to determine how it wants to function. Its culture, education, infrastructure, even laws and economy are the society's to decide upon, as long as the way that it does these things does not interfere with an individual's right to free will. But as much as we are the same, we are different. On this trip, I have learned that a system or solution that works for one culture may not work for a different one. The first and most defining example of this was in South Africa, when we tailed home caregivers in the townships surrounding Plettenberg Bay. Many of our group reached a consensus that the organizations that work in the area, Plet Aid and That's It, were ineffective. The initial theories we came up with as to why they were ineffective held the organizations culpable. We thought the caregivers were lazy and or incompetent. Only after several seminars and conversations with Plet Aid's leader, Mandy Frost, did it become clear that the problem lay not in the organizations, but in the difficulties of implementing change to a system with several layers and levels of people, infrastructures, cash flows, etc. More importantly, the culture of the people in the townships was different from the culture in the United States, or even in the largely white, wealthy cities of South Africa itself. For example, most people in the townships cared more about their relationships with their friends, neighbors, and family than their own personal health. Add to this cultural preference the enormous amount of stigma that comes with having HIV/AIDS, and the result is that many people choose not to take their medication, and others choose not to get tested at all. While thinking about the complexity of this and other issues, and the systems that seek to solve them, I realized that the interconnection between systems and within any particular system means that positively affecting one part of a system may make another part of that system worse. For example, raising the wages of bus drivers may require the company to increase revenues, which it would do by raising fares. This would, in turn, pose a problem to the poor riders who rely on low fares in order to get to work in time. The revelation that interconnectedness makes change difficult, and that sometimes change intending to improve things can make things worse, has been the most important thing that I've learned on the academic side of things over this trip. As an idealist and a moral universalist, these are difficult things to accept. My brain wants everything to be black and white, and it strives for perfection. It is very rare for anything to be perfectly black or perfectly white. I had been gradually learning this over the past few years, but our group's identity crisis in India gave me a significant kick in that direction. After reading Ivan Illich's speech, "To Hell with Good Intentions," which he delivered to a room full of volunteers about to be let loose in Mexico, a question that had been cooking for a while started to burn in our minds. Why does the developed world aid the developing world? Is this aid well-intentioned? Even if it is well-intentioned, does it do more harm than good? Why are we here? Are we doing harm? Should we be teaching these kids? Should we even be on this trip? I believe that people should help each other and that nations should help each other. But those questions and the ensuing debates amongst the group and with one of my roommates, when we weren't playing chess, shook my blind faith in the current system of humanitarianism, charity, and volunteerism. I am sure that this lesson, that a concept I believe to be perfectly wonderful is not so, and may actually do more harm than good, can be applied to many other concepts in development and in life. It is a reminder to examine both information given to me and conclusions that I draw myself, because it is a combination of these two that form my perception of something. The conclusion that I draw now is that I don't know the exact right way to support people who don't have everything they need. I do have some ideas, such as eliminating currency in favor of a social contract-based communalism. I get that response a lot. And they are constantly evolving as I engage in discussion with peers and mentors, read books and articles, and reflect on what I've learned. The idea of mutually beneficial connections is an important part of my worldview. I believe that we as people are all responsible for taking care of each other. We as people all form parts of the system that is the world. This is a belief that I have held for a long time, and it has not fundamentally transformed. But it has evolved. I'd like to tell you a story about how it has evolved. You'll have to bear with me, though, as there's a little bit of backstory in each of them. For Thanksgiving in India, we made little paper turkeys, and each of us wrote something we were grateful for in each other person on a little paper feather. We then glued the person's feathers on the turkey with his or her name on it, and voila! We had a fun group activity and a lovely memento, plus positive reinforcement in the form of appreciation, which is always welcome. Every single one of the feathers on my turkey said more or less the same thing. I appreciate your kindness and caring for others. But one added, sometimes a little too much. The person who wrote that feather was absolutely right in their intention, if not in their wording. Of course, one can never care too much for another, but one can, and I sometimes am, overbearing in my search to help others. Many times I have wanted to help someone, or give someone something, and they have refused it. Of course, in our culture, it is often customary to refuse help initially, so I offer again, perhaps a little more insistently. Again, they refuse. There is where I should probably stop. Perhaps with an, okay, but if you decide you do want it, don't hesitate to let me know. Usually that's what I do. However, there have been numerous times where I have kept insisting to the point where the would-be helpee snaps at me. Over this trip, I drew a parallel between this tendency of mine and the realization that what works for one system may not work for another. I hope that I am now less pushy. But I didn't stop there. I drew a parallel from the helping lesson back to the diverse systems lesson and to TBB's central theme of development, and realized that many countries and organizations giving aid are overbearing in their insistence on helping, in spite of the receiving country's wishes. Granted, many times the aid givers do this in their own self-interest, but some say that my helping people is only because I am trying to ingratiate myself with them. I don't think so, but then again, I wouldn't, would I? Because then I would have to admit a fault of my own, something that is very necessary for the positive evolution of people, but is very difficult as well. I do think I have become a little better at it over this trip, and would like to continue to improve. Speaking of self-growth, one of the greatest things that I learned on this epic journey came very early, in the first few days. It was that making oneself vulnerable to a virtual stranger can turn them into a close friend in an instant. So I'm going to practice that lesson now. I had a lot of time for reflection over these past 7 months. I looked back on my childhood and on my middle and high school careers, and I had mixed feelings on what I saw. In my childhood, I saw the beginnings of a superiority complex. I was always the leader, always had to be in charge. As I grew older, I sometimes had the uncomfortable feeling that I was better than a certain person or group of people I was with. I am ashamed of this. But I also saw a boy who was genuinely concerned for the well-being of those around him and of the world in general. I think this contributes greatly to the aforementioned superiority complex. I don't see the kindness, the care for others in many people that I meet or that I read about. Now, are the last three sentences a product of my egotistical mind? You decide. On second thought, don't, because I also learned that I'm sick of being judged, scorned, and put down by others. I got that a lot in middle school from many of my classmates, and in a class with only 37 people, meanness from anyone is especially painful. I got it in high school too from my enemies, my then girlfriend, and occasionally my otherwise awesome best friends. Now don't get me wrong, there are many times that I deserve criticism. There have been many times over this trip that I have deserved criticism, such as the umpteen times that I've been a little too exuberant and annoyed somebody, or did something that made someone uncomfortable. But I've learned more about what to do in these circumstances, how to criticize me so that it is productive and it is not confusable with bullying in any sort. Unless I'm saying or doing something with immediate and dire consequences, it is usually best to let me do what I'm doing until an opportunity arises to catch me alone and kindly point out what you think I did wrong. Knowing the best way to give constructive criticism will help a great deal, as it will help me give it to others and tell others how to give it to me so that we can work together productively. By the way, here's an example of what I'm talking about, interconnectedness. I learned the lesson about constructive criticism, but I also have to apply the lesson about how things that work for one person may not work for another. Which means that even though I know the best way to give me constructive criticism, I must still pay attention to others, because that may not be the best way for them. And when I give constructive criticism to others, I must remember that their actions do not necessarily always reflect who they are as a person. People make mistakes. The idea is to learn from them and to progress or evolve oneself through that mistake and subsequent learning. Charles Darwin's original theory of evolution states, in a nutshell, that species gradually adapt to surroundings through natural selection. What I am proposing is similar, that through outside input and introspection together, we as a unified but diverse people, human people, can work together to realize this universal truth, that everyone has the right to determine their own fate. The reason I suggest evolution is because its opposite, transformation, would be disastrous. If we were to implement a communalist system in the United States tomorrow, it would fail catastrophically. Because Americans are not ready for that. We don't have the mindsets, we don't have the infrastructure, and we don't have the desire. So it will be difficult, it will take a long time, and we will make mistakes, and that's okay. In fact, it may be better that way. So let's work together, make change together, progress together to liberate all of humanity. That's what I believe. But come talk to me later in life. My worldview is still evolving. Thank you.
We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Can you tell a story about your teaching experience in India that was somehow connected to this which you just did?
Sure, what aspect of it?
Whatever seems relevant to you.
Okay. So in India, we each taught at a different school. I taught at the mentally challenged school. There, the one thing that popped up with us was the idea that we're teaching English to them, and they speak Hindi. Also, English is the language of their colonial oppressors, the British. And so we felt awkward that we weren't speaking Hindi, that we were teaching in English. My student, Hubert, was a 17-year-old with the math level of maybe a third grader. And teaching him was very difficult because his IQ was lower than average, and he didn't speak English. I think we made demonstrable progress together. And I think that I learned more about how to teach or how to work with people with mental challenges and how to work with people who don't speak my language from working with him. And I think that he learned more about math and interaction with the outside world. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So, I really love the presentation. I found the honesty and you were just very forthright in your experience. I really appreciate that. I'm really curious, as you think about transitioning home, and you think about all of these changes that have happened for you, and who you are, who you want to be, and how that shapes your relationships with people, with family and friends and such. Is there anything you're nervous about? I mean, are there particular moments that feel charged and that you're anticipating positively or negatively?
I'm definitely nervous because while I've been gone, both I have changed a lot, and the people back home have changed as well. And previously we've not necessarily changed the same way, but we've been changing together, you know what I mean? Now we've split apart, not necessarily in the way in our similarities, but I haven't been there to experience the church, and they haven't been with me to experience my change. So the reintegration is going to be difficult, I expect, because there may be some similarities that are now differences, and there may be some differences that are now similarities, and there may just be a new dynamic as well. Yeah, that's my, I guess, my biggest, not concern, but anxiety.
Can I share one reflection?
Yeah.
From your presentation, it also sounds though as though you've developed some skills that will actually make that integration easier, because it sounds like you're thinking a lot about how to interact carefully with others and give them the space to be who they are and determine their own fate, and how to create that space for yourself too.
I think that it's definitely, I've had this ideology of mine for a long time, but it's sort of been jumbled, and I've had to sort of follow what I believe based on just sort of my instinct, which is fine, and I still do that, and I'm glad that I do that. Now that I've clarified it and unified it, I can also follow what I believe based on my thinking, based on is that in line with my beliefs, as well as my heart, and that.
So given all of these reflections from the last 7 months and the years before that, in this coming year, what is the thing you're looking forward to the most?
Looking forward to learning more about what I've learned. I'm looking forward to applying what I've learned to college, to world events, to what I experience in the next year. Is Chris Morales here? If he is, I know he's got questions.
He's in the other one.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you, John.
Clark?
I have one. Yeah. You talked about your group had an identity crisis.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Well, we thought of ourselves, we began to think of ourselves as, are we oppressors? Through neo-imperialism. Yeah, oh God, he's right. The fact that we were teaching the kids in English rather than their native language Hindi, the fact that we were teaching them as white visitors, and volunteers there was a turnover rate of like 2 weeks for volunteers, meant that they didn't get to really build a relationship with their teachers. And we were worried that perhaps by coming into the Indian schools as people who look different, speak different, just are different, and that is constantly happening, we were worried that there was a possibility that different would be seen as better, because there's, in most cultures, there's a pretty fundamental respect and sort of looking up to, you know what I mean, from a student to a teacher. And we were worried that if we became the teacher, that looking up to and respect could be perverted into something like an inferiority complex.
Did you get any insight from the other perspective? I mean, this is a system where they also engage TBD and have you come in, so there's some value exchange that they're looking at. Presumably they do a positive exchange. Do you understand that dynamic? Can you talk about that?
Not nearly as well. I could give you what little I know and my own theory. What I do know is that this is the exchange of so the organization that we worked with to orchestrate the volunteering was called Indian Network for Development Exchange. So the exchange is important. The exchange of ideas. Unfortunately, exchange may be a misnomer because there's no real two way. It's one way. We don't have Indian people coming to teach our students. On very rare occasions, we do. We have guest teachers, but that's mostly at the university level. In fact, pretty much entirely at the university level. We certainly don't have Indian teachers coming to teach our elementary school students, our middle school students, our high school students. And so, my theory is that they wanted us to come, as sort of an auxiliary.
Do you feel like the students and the people there were your teachers?
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Absolutely.
Independent exchange,
yeah.
not a physical.
You're right. You're right. The difference there, I guess, is that we're sending highly privileged, almost entirely white people to India, and if a similar program was implemented from India to the United States, it would be much more